I'm very honored to be here as well. So yes, I mean, it's paradigms. You know, it's a word that, like Amelia just said, seems to be everywhere, and we keep talking about shifting these paradigms. We like to shift them all the time. It's like we don't like paradigms; we just want to push them somewhere else. But that's what academia is about, very much, isn't it? Academia is about changing the way that we see things, changing the way that we understand the world. And changing, in our field, is very much about changing not changing for the sake of changing, but basically improving and becoming a bit more sophisticated in our understanding of what language is. And this is very much what my interest is. Amelia said, quite rightly, my sort of broadly, my area is world Englishes, and English is an international lingua franca. And within that, I'm very interested in how we conceptualize English, and what the implications are of our conceptualization of English. Something that I want to say before I start moving the slides is that I want to give it a bit of an historical background. And again, speaking of shifting paradigms, I think we're in a period now, right now as we speak, we're in a very particular period, I suppose interesting from many points of view, but worrying from many points of view as well. I mean, look at where we are now. Look at where we were about 25 years ago. Remember, 25 years ago, more or less, the world was in a very, very different, there was a very, very different climate in the world, right? The Soviet Union was coming to an end. Mikhail Gorbachev was like a superstar in the world. He was pushing the process of democratization of the Soviet Union, is changing things. The Berlin Wall came down, 1989, like huge steps forward. Apartheid in South Africa, you remember? And it was, the world was in a state of euphoria because of all these this things that were happening. Everyone was very happy. Well, most people were very happy. And this was 25 years ago. It wasn't just 25 years ago, and then again the process went on. The enlargement of the European Union. It's become now, I've lost count of how many countries it includes. Kind of expanded eastwards, became bigger and bigger. So the idea of union, obviously, it is a supranational institution, and that kind of happened in the last, again, sort of 10, 15 years. I suppose the same process, it's a process that led to another momentous event, which was the election of Obama as President of the United States. Something that, until very recently before that, seemed unthinkable. Someone who's not white become President of the United States was like, wow, and then it happened. And again, the world was in a euphoria. I still remember when Obama went to Germany. I think it was Berlin, and he was welcomed by an ocean of people, and everybody was like ecstatic. 2008, this was, So where are we now? 2016. So 8 years later, what has happened? In the last few years, not 8 years, but in the last 2, 3, 4 years, in the last few months. Like we are now living in a completely, something that looks like a very, very different world. And a lot of people are getting really sort of, I'm very depressed, I have to admit, I confess. Right? I suffer from depression because of this. First, I live in England. I'm Italian, so I'm European. And I don't, anyway. I'm European, I live in England. I've been there for 12 years. I was there before as well. I lived in Asia for a while. And now, 23rd of June, there was this crazy referendum in the UK where people were told that if they left the European Union, magically there would be a lot of money for the National Health Service. Things like that. And people voted to leave the EU. Well, a marginal majority of people voted to leave the EU. The UK, one of the major countries in the European Union, decided, well, the people, well, I shouldn't say the people, but sort of the majority of the voters, slight majority of the voters, decided to leave the EU. Big thing, shock, nobody expected that. And elsewhere in Europe, all these kind of far-right movements becoming bigger and bigger, and basically every one of these movements sort of playing the card of national identity, ethnic identity even, religious identity. We don't like those people because they're not like us. We want to be, like these crazy ideas of, sort of traditional land, territory, blood, and all these things, And these are becoming, they're kind of gaining ground at an incredible pace. And then only a couple of weeks ago, a complete madman of a person, even person is a bit of a compliment, becomes the new president of the United States. I mean, how crazy is that? I mean, it's just unbelievable, right? But what is unbelievable is how quickly we seemed to have moved from a moment, well, not a moment, actually, a very long moment, where borders seemed to become less important and less relevant. So unions and the breaking down of barriers of all types, physical as well as metaphorical. And now everybody wants to re-erect walls. I mean, Trump wants, well, now he's kind of stopped saying that. But, until the day before yesterday, he was saying he wanted to build this huge wall between the USA and Mexico. And get the Mexicans to pay for it. So walls that went down and then new walls are coming up. And everybody wants to do that. Everybody wants to build walls. Borders are becoming more important. So, the UK is leaving the European Union. Other countries are looking at the UK thinking, maybe we could do the same. And, you've got all these populist movements. Look at what's happening in France as well. We have to really be worried about the elections in France as well, I think, because, we've got Le Pen. That seems to be a pretty serious contender. So, so borders are coming back. Nationalisms are coming back. Just yesterday I was at the airport, I looked at the cover of The Economist, and the cover of The Economist was dedicated to the resurgence of nationalisms in Europe. And it's all kind of very, very, it's mind-blowing because it's all happening so quickly. And for people like us, this talk about echo chamber, we kind of live, we talk to one another, we are shocked together and we say how shocked we are, etc. And there's an entire other world out there that we have relatively limited contact with, but it exists and it's true, palpable. So now, what can we do? Because now, increasingly, and I think rightly so, academia there are demands being made on academia that basically have to do with impact, have to do with, so research, you do your piece of research, you do something wonderful. How is that wonderful thing that you've done, how is it relevant? How does it, in a way, contribute to changing things outside academia? And this is something that a lot of us are kind of coming to terms with. So I suppose one big question is for people who are interested in language is how is our interest in language relevant to what's happening in the world? Now, now before big disclaimer now, I'm not going to give you the recipe now. Okay, this is now from the next slides going to be a series of recipes on how to save the world. No, but I am I'm talking about ways in which we can, and this is the things that are happening. We are reflecting and reconsidering what language is, and I think that reconsideration of what language is going on, especially in sociolinguistics. It's been going on in sociolinguistics for the past few years. I think it's a useful antidote to what's happening outside, and maybe to some extent it might have some kind of impact. But so let me tell you a bit more about what it is that I'm talking about. So the key words there. So paradigms, is a key word, as we said, shifting paradigms. And then some keywords in my title: order, and so one of them is border. The reason why I put the order in yellow is just because it's got the same word in both border and disorder. Don't take the benefits of disorder too seriously. All right? It just it sounded kind of interesting. But the border crossings is the key thing that I want to talk about. So let's start with looking at a little bit of, I'm very, very fascinated by the language that is used in social media, and also in general, I'm interested in the language that shows what we can call border crossings. These two little extracts come from the first one is from a Singaporean newspaper, the Straits Times, which is the only newspaper in Singapore. And then the second one is from the Bangkok Post in Thailand, both English language newspapers. So I'd like to keep this a little bit interactive if we can. All right. In fact, I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to be here, and I want to ask you if you can still hear me at the back. Okay. You can? Cannot? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. I'll try and speak loudly. So what I want to know from you is what do you think of the word kiasu in that first extract, and specifically, do we think that is an English word? Since it's a bit of a silly question, but most people, and I'm quite happy about that, because that's what I wanted, are saying no, it's not. It's not an English word. And I mean, so I could agree with you, and I can say, well, kiasu is a word that comes from Hokkien. Hokkien is a Chinese language spoken in the southeast of China, because it's considered a dialect, because as you know in China the only language is considered a language is Mandarin, everything else is a dialect. But Hokkien is very different from Mandarin. And it's spoken by a lot of the ethnically Chinese people in Singapore, and it's also spoken by the ethnically Chinese people in Malaysia, besides other languages as well. So, but then it's a word that is used routinely, like that, for example. There's no quotation marks. It's not in italics. It's not marked in any way as this is a foreign word. So in some way, the writers of the article don't or didn't feel the need to mark that word as non-English. So from their point of view, actually, kiasu is an English word. So normally when we use a foreign word, the convention is to mark it somehow. Italics, quotation marks and things like that. Whereas they didn't do it. But if it's not English, here's my next question. what is it then? This is, I'm not doing a test. What's a common word that we use to refer to words like that? So a word, a calque, or a borrowing, a loan word, and things like that. Maybe it's English, yeah, maybe it's English. From an Orthodox World English's perspective, so the World English's people, I should put myself in that group as well. But you know, the classic World English perspective would be that's Singaporean English, and look, this is Singaporean English because we've got the word kiasu and other things like that. Okay, so let's leave it at that. Maybe it's a loan word, maybe it's a borrowing, or one of these things. I always find these words kind of interesting because, you know, if it's a borrowing, if you borrow something, at one point you give it back. You know, whereas kiasu, I don't think they're going to give it back to China. But what about the second one? So in the second one, we've got something going on there also interesting from many points of view. So, you know, police said yesterday they could find no motive for the killing that said that Mr. Procoret had a minor wife who lived in the same soil as his family. Now the question is, in that second extract, what do we feel isn't quite English? Okay, so we've got the word soy, and the word soy means street in Thailand. Minor wife. Now minor wife is interesting because minor wife yeah. I mean minor wife means it's like a second wife, generally younger. It's only been illegal to have a minor wife in Thailand relatively recently. It used to be for men who could afford to have a second wife, they would have a second wife. And normally, to the full knowledge, so the first wife knew about it, so it was kind of done. So it wasn't something secretive. And it's interesting that minor wife is used because minor wife outside that context doesn't really mean very much. Well, yeah. So in a way, it's a very localized use of English. So this, unlike soy or kiasu, we have English words here, but the meaning of that is, you could argue, very localized, very Thai. Leaving aside the sort of the ethics and the morality, whatever it is about it, don't worry about that too much now. But what I want to sort of draw your attention to is that that's again something pretty localized in terms of use of English, and the word soy, which means street. Again, you could probably say the same thing about soy that you said about kiasu, borrowing, etc. The word soy is used in Thailand all the time, regardless of what language you speak, to say street. So within days of arriving in Thailand, you'd be using the word soy, because everybody uses soy. Nobody says street. So in English or in Thai or indeed in any other language that one speaks, they would say soy. And other words like that as well. So the question again is the same. So but is it an English word? If we use it within English routinely all the time, is it an English word? Is it not an English word? And then again, borrowing, etc. This is just something I ask as well my students. It's an interesting question because it makes us begin to reflect what counts as, what are the boundaries of a language, for example. So what's inside, what's outside, and then what happens when you get things that appear to be coming from outside, and so on. But I'm not gonna. Yes. So now kiasu is in the Oxford English Dictionary, which is the repository of truth about the English language. If you want to know anything about the English language, you look up You look it up on the Oxford English Dictionary, and Kyesu is there. So, you know, the Oxford English Dictionary thinks that it's an English word. And it does say there, it says borrowing from Chinese. Kind of a bit vague, I mean, Chinese. But anyway, it says it's a borrowing, but it's part of the OED. So it's an interesting status of that word, you know. It's part of the Oxford English Dictionary, so it's somehow, therefore, it's part of the English language. World English scholars would say it's part of Singaporean English. I'm kind of inclined to say that, you know, we don't even have to worry if it's part of English or not. It's used, people know what it means, and it's part of people's linguistic repertoire. If we read it, in fact, I'm going to go back for a moment. Now, that's only a very tiny bit of context. If you read the full article, you'd understand very easily what Kyesu means. And even if you didn't, if you went to Singapore and spoke to people, within minutes, you would know what Kyesu means. In the same way as within minutes, you would know what soy means. And the problem of, is this an English word or not, completely disappears. It doesn't matter. It's part of what becomes your linguistic repertoire, or even more generally, your semiotic repertoire. The things that you draw from in order to communicate with people. Kyesu means, Kyesu means sort of incredibly competitive, of wanting to be the first all the time, you know, wanting to be able to play the violin and swim at the same time, that kind of thing, you know, so be really, really good at everything. So, again, you know, we mentioned World Englishes before. So from a World Englishes perspective, what happens is that what we saw before would be examples of Singaporean English or even Thai English, and then, you know, you could have all sorts of other Englishes, possibly a Bulgarian English as well, you know. So the idea being that everywhere that English has relocated, it has acquired you know, sort of the local flavors, you know, from the culture and the languages with which it is in contact, etc. And it has become slightly different. It has become a little bit Bulgarian, a little bit Thai, a little bit Singaporean, a little bit Italian, a little bit Nigerian, and so on. So it's become, therefore, Thai English, Nigerian English, South African English, and so on and so forth. This was a paradigm shift back in the 80s. It was a paradigm shift because it went against the idea that English was one thing, that English was only and exclusively a British or an American entity, property, and that any other variety of English was substandard or didn't even exist. And so the revolution that Braj Kachru initiated, actually, you know, in the 70s, but then, you know, more prominently in the 80s, in the mid-80s, was the idea of plurality. No longer one or maximum two Englishes, but many Englishes. So the idea that English isn't one thing, but it's many things. So that was a paradigm shift in the mid-80s and following years. But that has now come, it's become itself a paradigm that needs shifting. Because, I mean, the reason why I've chosen flags to represent this is because even the World English's paradigm focuses very much on nations, focuses very much on the idea of there is one English per nation. Right? So there is one English in India, one English in Nigeria, one English in Singapore, one English in South Africa, another one in Trinidad, another one in Jamaica, another one, and so on and so forth. So fundamentally, that idea follows the national boundaries that you can see on the map. So back in the 80s, being very revolutionary, but now it's beginning to feel a little bit, it's struggling to deal with this. World English isn't totally able to say very much about this, apart from perhaps that these things would be slightly bizarre forms of code mixing, perhaps. This is some, I've been stalking some of my students, some of my past students from Malaysia, and not just them, other people. I've been stalking a lot of people on Facebook. But it's public, so I'm allowed to do it, okay? Nothing illegal, you know? And look, anonymity, everything. So ethics is covered, right? But look, what is interesting here is what's going on. What these people are doing is that they, you know, from our perspective, they're using two languages together, and at the same time they're using it in that kind of sort of digital communication sort of way, you know, social media with abbreviations, etc. So you've got that plus the fact that it's a bit of English, a bit of Malay, and in ways that it's not always obvious where you would draw the line. You know, if you were to highlight the English bits and the Malay bits, you know, it's not always very obvious. I'm going to show you some more examples of this. You know, you can see how seamlessly the languages are combined, blended. This is quite interesting. This is two friends, two Thai friends talking to one another, and they, you know, and what this seems to be doing is communicating by making use of the linguistic repertoire that they have available. There's no particular reason for them to use, if you think about it, you know, English or German, you know, but they do, and it doesn't even matter why they do it, but they do it. So, and this might be called code switching. There's lots of names that have been used for this kind of thing. You know, code switching, code mixing. This is slightly becoming a bit old-fashioned now. You know, code meshing, language hybridity, translingual practices, translanguaging. All these terms, what they try to do is to capture the fact that more than one language are combined together. And especially the later ones here are kind of being used more and more in the literature. All of them involve some kind of linguistic border crossing. All of them involve removing a border, removing a barrier, and using different languages. When I did some interviews with the people that were communicating on social media, I've got quite a bit more data as well. And basically, one of the main themes that came out of those interviews is that when they were using English and Malay, for example, they weren't consciously thinking, I'm going to use a bit of English and a bit of Malay. It was very, very natural to them to do so. Very normal. They didn't even attach any specific or particular significance to this choice. It wasn't even a choice. It's the way that they communicate. And it's not, this is the thing, it's not a special way of communicating online. And then when they're offline, they speak differently. They speak exactly the same way. I've lived in Southeast Asia for a while, and it's true. And I'm very, very sort of fascinated by how true that is for a lot of people in the world. In fact, as we probably know, people like us, meaning bilingual or trilingual, etc., people, we are the vast majority in the world. Monolingual speakers are a tiny minority. Monolingual speakers are a tiny minority of people in the world. that means a lot of people would tend to have in their linguistic repertoires more than one language at the very least. And when that happens, languages quite naturally, it's almost like two liquids, sort of combine together. So that particular thing that we saw before on Facebook isn't a Facebook thing. It's something that happens in real life. And I want to show you, I don't know how much time I've got left actually. If you can...
20 minutes?
Okay, excellent. 20 minutes. I want to, so it's not something that happens on Facebook or social media. It's not what Facebook and social media in general are doing, they're making these practices visible. They're not creating these practices, they're simply making them more visible. For example, to people like us, people who research these things. Oh look, there's a lot of data, and it's very convenient because all that data is just there, it's on your screen, you can copy it, cut and paste, you put it in your paper, and you talk about it and discuss it, etc. But there's a lot of it that happens offline, a lot more difficult to capture because you have to go around with it, as we know, with a recorder, etc. But it's out there. So, number one, this isn't something specific to online communication. Number two, this is in no way specific to now. This is something that has been happening since all the time. And I'll show you, there's an excellent scholar called Laura Wright at the University of Cambridge, and she specializes in this kind of practices in medieval texts in England. And what she's found, for example, is that a lot of official documents produced in medieval England were an incredible mesh of Anglo-Norman, French, sort of what was at the time English, and I'm putting inverted commas because I'll tell you in a moment, Latin, together in the same document, and sometimes even in the same word. That'd be, from our point of view, two different languages. So she showed us, which I don't have here because I don't like to use other people's data very much, but she showed us, when she came to Portsmouth, this text which she had color-coded according to the languages that we can identify now. And this text, this medieval text, was like a rainbow. Because every color represented the language. And again, she stressed how that wasn't an exception, but how much that was routinely the case. Now, my own data, this is Kanagraja's quote, which I don't. I think I want to show you as much data as possible. This is just a photograph taken by a friend of mine in India, but this is just you have tons of this kind of thing, where you have here you have Hindi and English together. This is the meaning of that, by the way. I absolutely love, I adore the National Egg Coordination Committee. I think that, this picture, I will never get rid of this, mainly because of that. Forget about the data, but that, I think the National Egg Coordination Committee is brilliant. But this, people, if you go to the British Museum, you can see this. This is the Frank's casket. It's a little box. It's more or less this size. Beautiful, beautifully carved. Apparently made of whalebone. An incredible piece of art. It has been dated to about the year 800 or 900. So before the Normans arrived to England. What's really it's a beautiful piece of art. Just for that, it's amazing. But what's interesting for people like us is the language on it. Now I'll show you some zoomed in images. This language all around it, in each one of the four sides. There's some language. most of it is written in runic characters. It's quite interesting. So, in order to, when I looked at this, then I learned the runic characters. It's really easy. I always thought, God, this looks very scary. It's actually extremely easy as an alphabet. What's interesting, anyway, is that, so we're talking about, let's say, the 9th century. What is interesting is that this text that goes around each of the 4 sides of this box, it's very multilingual as well. It's like the Facebook things that we saw earlier. It's not different in any way. It uses runic characters as well as Latin characters. Can't see it very well probably, but maybe you can look at the, you can see the E, the R, the N, the T. These are Latin characters. Everything else is in runic characters. But even when you have, in certain bits, even when the runic characters are used, we've got something like that. That's a Latin word. It's not even, apparently it's not even a proper Latin word. Some linguists have said, oh, this is like misspelling, etc. It's not misspelling. It's just, in those days, people did what they wanted with spelling. But this is the translation of that bit, by the way. But what I find extremely fascinating is that the, let's call them translingual practices that we are being so fascinated by on social media now. Not only do they exist outside social media, but they've always been there. Now, I'm not showing this, oh look, this is the proof. This is simply an illustration of the fact that when people have always used the languages that they have available. That's the basic, the bottom line. And I find, I mean, the Franz casket is incredibly interesting from that point of view. If you do happen to go to London British Museum, go and have a look at it. Don't ask the people helping that. They don't know where it is. I asked about it and they had to look it up, etc. And then somebody finally said it's on the 5th floor, etc. So it's not very well sort of known. This is the, now this is written on one of the 4 sides. That is the transliteration of that. This is a possible translation. Now, I heard before a couple of times the word Old English being mentioned. So now, in commonly, let's say, this is considered Old English, isn't it? Old English. That in itself is quite interesting, because if we call this Old English, we are fundamentally saying this is pretty much the same thing as this, except that this is old and this is new. But if you just a cursory look at it, I mean, forget about the runes even. I mean, this is the actual writing. This is the contemporary translation, or a possible translation. Because they're not even sure how to translate the different versions of this translation. They are not totally sure how to translate it. So English scholars are not sure how to translate a language that is called English. See what I'm saying? Okay, old, but still English. This thing that we are calling Old English is actually extremely different from this. If anybody hearing that, the people that have been trained to read Old English properly, etc., if you hear it, you don't understand anything. I don't understand anything. If you read it, you might recognize, oh look, that word looks a little bit like fish. Okay, great. But then if you read German, you can do the same thing. If you read Icelandic, you can recognize a few words here and there. But we don't call Icelandic weird English. We call it Icelandic. Why do we call this Old English? We call this Old English. We started calling this Old English at the beginning of the 19th century. Actually, the end of the 19th century. my mistake, end of 19th century. This started being called Old English for political reasons. Because by calling it Old English, we can establish a linear continuity between this and this. We can say that the English language has been in Britain for a very long time. The English language is a very old language. It goes back to the 5th century. You know, it goes back maybe even earlier. There's some histories of the English language, the textbooks. I can't remember which one it is. And the first sentence is, the English language arrived in Britain in the 5th century. You know, and you can imagine, you know, the Angles and the Saxons and the Cliffs and the youths carrying the English language and the dictionaries, you know, carrying that and said, we're going to bring the English language to that country. But seriously though, so the fact that this is called Old English is entirely a political thing. And it was in a period where Europe, nationalism was sky high. New nations were being formed. Bulgaria actually 1879, Italy 1861, Germany more or less same period. Nationalism was really big at the time. Scientific racism was very big. Languages, it was very important for languages to be categorized according to national identities. Languages were instrumental to defining national identities as well. And this was part of this. This was part of that movement. This was a period where borders were extremely important, right? So this was called Old English because of that. In order to say this is a very old language, in here and defines who we are. Yes, but if you look at it now, it's completely different. As they admit, Old English has the advantage of suggesting the unbroken continuity of English throughout its existence. But it's an instrumental advantage. It has nothing linguistic about it. The fact that we recognize some words, and that some of the words in what we now refer to as the Anglo-Saxons, are kind of traveled through history. That doesn't make that language in any way, similar to current English. So that the whole idea of language, territory, nation, big thing, again, big deal, the end of the 19th century. Coming back now, isn't it? The whole idea of national identity, as I was saying at the beginning, borders, divisions. This is an interesting quote that I do want to read by Siegfried Marconi. It's a quote that I use a lot. And he says that the idea of language is understood in Western scholarship is a myth, part of a process of invention, a process set in motion in colonial Africa. He's referring to colonial Africa, but what he's saying is about, it's applicable to the rest of the world. The process of invention has been at two different levels. First, the speech forms used for communication acquired the name, Swahili, Kiswahili, whatever, Yoruba. Second, an ethnic identity based on language was then introduced. So this ethnic identity based on this language that we have named. Yet, prior to this, the speech forms used for communication were simply referred to as isintu, which meant human speech. And speakers were referred to as Usutu. There wasn't a concept of these people speak language X, these other people speak language Y. So language borders are like all other borders really. They offer a black and white or no shades of grey version of reality. More importantly, language borders don't simply distinguish language X from language Y, but they're also instrumental to drawing lines between groups of people. That's the people. So speakers of X, speakers of Y. These people that speak this language are different from these other people, or more importantly, different from us who speak this other language. One of the one of the reasons, believe it or not, that Nigel Farage, the leader of the UK Independent Party in England, he was one of the most vociferous proponents of the Leave campaign. He said that when he travelled in public transport, he felt very uncomfortable when he heard different languages spoken around him. He didn't like to hear Romanian spoke, for example. He mentioned Romanian as an example, being spoken around him because he didn't understand it. And, you know, so that language meant these are different people. I don't want to be sitting next to these different people. And things have been changing recently. And I think I was speaking earlier about linguistics and what kind of impact linguistics can make. If you look at the documents of the Council of Europe on languages, very interesting things are now being said on plurilingualism. And this is you know, this is fairly cutting edge, I have to say. You find this in recent literature, but not much in. When I say recent literature, I'm talking about, you know, sort of the last 5 years ago, last 5 years. So, you know, this is on top of the literature, and it's very nice that this is so. Plurilingualism differs from multilingualism, which is the knowledge of a number of languages, language A, B, C, or the coexistence of different languages in a given society. The plurilingual approach emphasizes the fact that as an individual person's experience of language in its cultural context expands from the language of the home to that of society at large and that to the languages of other peoples, he or she does not keep these languages and cultures in strictly separated mental compartments, but rather builds up a community competence to which all knowledge and experience of language contributes and in which languages interrelate and interact. In different situations, a person can call flexibly upon different parts of this competence to achieve effective communication with a particular interlocutor. This is really good. This is basically saying what I was saying in the beginning, that people have different languages at their disposal and they will use them as they see fit and according to the context and according to who the interlocutors are. You are constantly negotiating, we are constantly negotiating our communication with whoever it is that we're speaking to. You know, especially among multilingual people like us. You know, unfortunately, I'm only staying in Sofia for 3 days. If I stayed a bit longer, you know, gradually I'd be learning a bit more words, etc. I'd be wanting to use them, etc. I'd be using them together with the English that I have, etc. And that's how, you know, that process of integrating languages would carry on. I want to show you, this is important actually, because from this perspective, the aim of language education is profoundly modified. It is no longer seen as simply to achieve mastery of 1 or 2 or even 3 languages, each taken in isolation. I'm learning French now, and then I'm learning German, or even with the ideal native speakers as the ultimate model. Instead, the aim is to develop a linguistic repertory in which all linguistic abilities have a place. And it kind of leaves us with a research agenda, because it says, and I think Britta is the best person to address that, probably. I'm glad that she's coming after me, because the full implications of such a paradigm shift have yet to be worked out and translated into action. What do we do now about this in terms of language teaching? You know, there's a lot of elements of the paradigm that very urgently need shifting. We need to work out a way to do that. I think the underlying, if we have as an underlying assumption that languages don't need to be kept separated because they aren't separated in real life, then that's our starting point. Which is actually quite different from the World English's starting point, which simply said, there's this English, there's this other English, and this other English, where the separations are still there in the World English's paradigm. I think I'm going to end here, actually, because do we have some time for questions? Yeah. Thank you very much. I'd like to see if there's any questions or comments that we can discuss together. Yes.
I have a question concerning the last part of your talk.
Yeah.
And yeah, by the way, thank you very much. It's very interesting to me. And so I'm wondering if you say that, or the Council of Europe says we should change the term from multilingualism to plural.
Yeah.
Okay, it's for the Council of Europe, but it seems very Eurocentric to me. I think more English is in Southern Africa.
Yes.
And because their multilingualism has always been like this. It's not really separated.
Absolutely. You're very right. In fact, I had video clips of South African stand-up comedians using, speaking in a way that was very, very similar to the Facebook example we saw before. So they were, let's say, mixing. I kind of hesitant to say mixing because for me it's not even mixing. It's using, again, it's using a common linguistic repertoire. From that point of view, they're not mixing really. But yes, you're right. I agree with you that this is, mentioning the Council of Europe is Eurocentric, but I think the concept is applicable everywhere else. And you're totally right. It's almost like the Council of Europe has discovered this recently, and it's good that it has discovered it. But because Europe has been for so long, and still is, focused on this idea that you've got nations and languages, and then very clear borders. Whereas in a place like South Africa, it's not like that at all. So you get, not only have you got 11 official languages, but people again use them together as and when they need or want to. So yeah, so the concept is clearly applicable everywhere else in the world. We haven't got time to show the video, do we?
Well, we have some 7-8 more minutes.
7-8 more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, what I'll do is, can I show you just a quick video clip?
Yeah.
Because it's very nice to see, one thing is to see it on a piece of paper. One thing is to, now, these are South African stand-up comedians. So 4 videos, but we'll only show you one. I think I'll show you this one, the 5th one. See if it works.
Hola, hola! Fede, who's it? I'm not from Soweto. And times are bad, niyashuba noyanyiwa, global recession. It's so bad, ezim, abasebenzisa $dollars, no, abasebenzisa amarandi. And ababhayisi loose, they sell a drag. $200, thanks. I'm a customer, even the SABC is broke. And the SABC, they like repeating shit when they broke. Serious? No, they're gonna start repeating the news. I'm surprised too much. The Twin Towers have gone down. Hey, Shuvil. And with this whole financial crisis, this system is still trying to bring new laws. That's the new rule. $300. We asked in about to discipline our kids who go anywhere. So let's figure out Shama table order, let's figure police station, so we're going to swipe. Young Shama 5 times this month, young yes. So I figured out when I drive through a police station, yo, Shuvile. And usually I'm a vendor, I just
see what's happening there. I mean, these are not two languages. I don't see that as this guy using two languages. It's not. It's not switching. There's no moment where we can detect the switch. You know, he's using one, again, linguistic repertoire that he clearly shares with his audience. And that's completely normal and natural and nothing strange or special about it. So, like him, millions of people around the world do exactly the same. So obviously, you know, we do need pretty profound reconceptualization of what language is. That's basically, that's a fairly, the fundamental message of what I wanted to convey, really. So yeah, thanks for the question. So it reminded me of South Africa. I wanted to show that and I forgot. Thank you. Any more? There's a hand, okay.
Yes, please. No, it's not exactly with this clip, but what I really wanted to ask you now about the future of this European English is now with the Brexit thing, and you know, the French president, the first thing in the morning after Brexit, he announced that English is not now an official language. On the other hand, Ms. Merkel said, well, it couldn't be that. So what would be the future? I mean, now that we don't have English being the official language.
Yes, really good question, thank you. English isn't a British property or an American property. I mean, numerically speaking, we are the vast majority. When I say we, I mean people use English as one of the languages that they speak. And so the fact that now, if Britain exits the EU, then technically English will no longer be one of the official languages of the EU. That doesn't matter. It's a technicality. It's a technicality. English will continue to be used in the European Parliament. It would be completely crazy if it didn't, because it's by far the language that most people share. So, you know, those comments were entirely to do with national identities, nothing else. It was like, so the French, who is it, Hollande said that?
Yeah.
So said, oh, you know, now, you know, with some elements of pride, obviously, and resentment, completely understandable. He made that comment, but the comment was about Britain. In making a comment about the English language, he was commenting on Britain. Language is something that is so much bigger, especially the English language is so much bigger than Britain. So the future is simply that English will continue to be used. It couldn't be otherwise. You know, they can't now all of a sudden everybody stops using English.
It's always a political issue.
Yeah, I mean, if they feel very, very strongly about it, maybe some people will make it a point to not use English.
Can we make time for some more questions now? Because we have raised hands. Professor Kovačko?
Well, I'm teaching language and contact, and I was wondering, because about 90% of what you're saying overlaps with the approach of this particular framework. And at the very beginning, when you asked us whether Chiasso is English or not, can I say that it depends how you define language, and in the long run, language is something with open boundaries. So it depends. Isn't it better to speak of usage and not of what language is? The other point, which a bit embarrasses me, is because I'm Bulgarian, I don't know, but border for me is a physical thing, and can't we just say that it is not a matter of geographical borders at all, which this word evokes, but a cognitive process, as you said, about not keeping two more languages in separate compartments. So yes, in the framework of languages in contact, we say that it's subconscious, it's not controlled.
Absolutely.
And then,
Yeah.
as you said, it's semiotic. It
Yeah.
becomes an extra semiotic meaning.
Yes.
I want to point to this culture, I want to say something about my personality and so on. So would you just agree with these?
I agree entirely with everything he says. In fact, I'm glad he said it because, especially the last point is, in fact, everything that you said, I agree completely. The last point that you made is very, very important because perhaps, and it's my fault, I get the impression that when people sort of do this, sort of translingual practices or mixed languages together, they always do it entirely naturally without thinking about it, but you're completely right. Sometimes it's marked in the indexes, whatever, association, alliance with, that particular culture, modernity, or whatever. The Thai friends, in fact, when they switched to German, they probably did that for a reason. But what's interesting, though, in that case, is that they were speaking to one another, although they were doing it on Facebook, so probably aware that other people were watching inverted commas. But yes, I completely agree. I completely agree with the idea of borders. They don't need to be geographical. There's a cognitive element there, very important. There's a political element. I mean, you see, the border to me, it's very much a political entity, so very much connected to political identity and national identity. But yes, I mean, I have everything to learn from somebody like you because if you teach language in contact, you've got all the expertise in the world. And so therefore, thank you very much for your comment. And in fact, I will, if I do this or variant of this talk again, I will incorporate your comments and acknowledge, and I won't just steal them. So thank you very much. I don't know if we have time for yes.
What about here?
Sorry, was there somebody else? Because I'm a bit bad at keeping.
Sorry. Okay, a quick question, and also Professor Panchina had a question, so can we hear both questions and then
Yes.
go to topics?
I was just wondering, would you say that we are living in the new Middle Ages or living in the new Middle Ages because politically this building up walls as well as this macaronic use of language? I can think of medieval lyrics, for instance, where you say something in Middle English and then in the next breath you say Rosso sine spina in Latin, and it's quite
I think that in fact the period where languages, I think that the separation of languages is an exception, but not the norm, both geographically and historically. So I think that languages being kept separated is something that has been happening, especially in the last perhaps 200 years or so, primarily in Europe, but elsewhere too, say, think of Japan, for example. But I still consider it an exception. So if the question is, do you think that now all of this is happening, does that mean that we are to some extent going back to medieval times where, I think that the answer to that is that has been going on for much longer and in many more parts of the world than we tend to think from our point of view. I think that we have this kind of almost natural tendency to thinking in terms of that sort of practice is somewhat exceptional. But I think they're far more normal, meaning the norm, than we think. Therefore, rather than are we going back to the medieval times, I think what social media are doing, they're revealing to us that we weren't fully something that we weren't fully aware of that has been going on all the time. I think that's my answer to your question.
It's being radicalized by the new media.
Yeah.
Facebook.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yes.
can we have one last question from you, and then
It's
we'll
okay.
stop the time.
I was just wondering, you sound like real native British English. That's why your English is just perfect. What factors do influence your choice of your linguistic repertoire? Do you offstage sometimes combine words? Your native Italian, right, with English?
Yes.
Do you do that?
I do that all the time. I do it. I do it. The accent, I'm slightly, I lived in England for a long time, you know, so, and your comment, every time because some people have said this to me when I go outside the UK, oh, you know, you speak like an English person. When I say this to my colleagues, they always laugh. they think I sound nothing like an English person. They make fun of me all the time. And so, but then when I speak to people that know Italian, either because they are Italian or because they know the language, maybe because I'm a bit biased, I do it. I kind of consciously do it. But yes. And again, it comes very natural, because you know, if I'm talking with someone that shares the languages that I speak, I see it very as a kind of artificial thing to kind of keep these languages separate.